Almost every movie about the construction of BAM, the Baikal-Amur mainline, prominently featured amazing foreign trucks. And as a very young boy, I always wanted to experience a ride in them. But Moscow was one place, and BAM was located in a completely different world entirely. And now, many decades later, that's a more accurate way to put it. In the city on the Neva, I found it, in the Passenger Autotrans Museum. Yes, it's worn out, but undefeated, and was in use until very recently. The Magirus-Deutz 232D19, and nothing else would do. The German giant, conqueror of the northern roads, and the most coveted truck for Soviet drivers. A benchmark vehicle, the history of the Magirus company goes way back, all the way to the reign of Kaiser Wilhelm, but that's not what interests us. Since then, there have been two major wars and many less defined ones, so everything in Deutschland has changed. We're interested in 3 dates. The first is related to the engine, the second is when this truck appeared, and the third is when it started being supplied to us. And most importantly, what the hell for? The West decided to sell these vehicles behind the Iron Curtain. So, the Magirus heavy-duty transport truck. The mass production began in 1974 under the established company Magirus-Deutz. It was a classic body-on-frame truck, and most importantly, a bonneted truck. The company explained that these vehicles were aimed at old-school customers who preferred having the hood in front. This provided extra safety. It was precisely these old-school types from the USSR who became interested in Magirus products. In fact, this was back in 1969. They were considering it. We didn't really have any cab-over trucks of our own. Yeah, and what is that anyway? A truck without a hood. But here? Here it's 5 tons of pure steel. And it's just beautiful, too. Interestingly, the German company did have cab-over models in their lineup, but there's a suspicion that it was our comrades who specifically requested this configuration, and the Germans agreed. Why? It's simple. The amount of the contract signed in 1970 was astronomical. If the reports are true, it was about 1,001,000,000 German marks. Just a quick note. Before the contract was signed, Magirus was on its last legs. It was even sold to the Iveco Group, and then suddenly, this kind of money. So the German burghers worked like Stakhanovites for the benefit of the USSR. The first vehicles arrived here in 1975. So, what is the truck itself like? Nothing supernatural, but built by the Germans with their approach to reliability and thoughtful design. The frame is at the core. Obvious, but I should remind you. The cab, the calling card of Magirus. And on this card, there are at least 2 or 3 recognizable elements. First, the emblem. Yes, it's a bit worn out. But let me repeat, what you see before you is not a machine barely surviving or on its last legs, but a living one. So, the emblem. It's a stylized letter M. Magirus, and above it, the sharp spire of the Ulm Cathedral. Ulm is the city where the company was born and thrived. Secondly, Soviet Magirus trucks had 2 air intakes at once, on the left and right of the windshield pillars, as well as additional headlights. The standard ones were installed in the bumper, but they haven't survived, and these round ones, here they are additional. The Western models didn't have them. The greatest point of pride for this classic truck is its distinctive air-cooled engine design, at a time when nearly every other manufacturer was making the transition toward using water-cooled engines. But Magirus kept improving their engines. Take a close look at the cab. Look familiar? It's like the ZIL 4331 or GAZ 3307. They took inspiration from it. By the way, the engine appeared in 1943 and was installed on Wehrmacht military vehicles. To be fair, only 2 companies in the world made air-cooled engines, Tatra and Magirus-Deutz. This one is equipped with a Deutz F10L 413, with a displacement of 14,137 cubic centimeters. a V-shaped 10-cylinder diesel with a maximum power of 310 horsepower at 2,600 RPM. Maximum torque is 809 Newton meters at 1,200 to 1,600 RPM. A huge fan is placed in the V. It draws in air and pushes it through the finned cylinder heads. It automatically increases its speed if the engine is heating up and decreases it if not. Which is what makes this engine so cool. It's indestructible and easy to maintain. Well, if you've been taught how to service this engine. You're a real mechanic if you can get it started even at minus 50 degrees. But most importantly, there's standardization. The components for all engines of different displacements are the same, and they only differ in the number of cylinders. We'll also talk about the running gear, since it has its own features. Overall, the front suspension uses longitudinal leaf springs with 2 per spring, rubber bump stops, and 2 double-acting hydraulic shock absorbers. All of this is fastened to the I-beam axle with U-bolts. At the rear, there are also leaf springs, but they're inverted. The axle is of the balancing type, which means there's only one mounting point, but there are also control arms and a stabilizer bar. But most importantly, if needed, everything here can be locked, both the axles and the differentials. Rear configuration. For Vark 6, the rear intermediate axles are identical except for internals. The intermediate axle has a clever device, a cylindrical gearbox. It transmits torque from the engine and 5-speed gearbox to both axles. This component handles locking the differential, and the axles are also equipped with onboard planetary mechanisms. The cab. For a driver in the Soviet Union, this was a special luxury. There is enough room for comfortably more than 3 people. You can easily sit here without any trouble. But since the Magirus trucks worked in the north, there are 2 independent Webasto heaters here. One heats the cab, but there's also a regular heater. And the second one heats the battery boxes. The cab itself is attached to the frame at the front with 2 rubber mounts. At the rear, it's mounted on a single rubber pad in the center of the support arch. Plus, there are 2 hydraulic shock absorbers. This design absorbed almost all vibrations transmitted from the frame, as well as engine vibrations. So, as for the instruments, the speedometer display, system pressure, engine oil temperature, and the battery charging status, everything is as usual. Here are the specific buttons that allow us to remotely lock the differentials in the rear axle assembly. There's a pneumatic valve installed there. The seat is beautifully ergonomic and completely adjustable. And of course, there is also an expansive wide-angle panoramic window. And now I'm going to use it. What do I mean by that? I mean, I'll be looking through it at the vast expanse of the first bus depot. By the way, have you seen the little windows? The little windows are for smokers, for those who enjoy it. Perfect. Euro 0 is the norm for old, very old, and quite worn-out diesels. Although back in Magirus' youth, the smoke was different. Our compatriots were very surprised by the fact that you could start moving without warming up the engine. By the way, these engines are still being produced, though now in China, and not in the not-so-friendly Europe. Engines like these, though locally assembled, are installed on military vehicles. We're driving an empty truck. The dump truck itself weighs 7.5 tons. If you load it up, it'll be 26 tons. Have you calculated the payload capacity? Now tell me, which Soviet truck is capable of that? And the engine is so incredibly torquey. that you can actually start off in 4th gear when the truck is completely empty. But you really shouldn't do that. But I truly and honestly believe it. The USSR mainly imported 2 types of Magirus-Deutz, the 232D 19 4x2 and the 290D 26 6x4, meaning they had 232 and 290 horsepower, respectively. With a total weight of 19 and 26 tons, there were also versions like service trucks and tractor units. Interestingly, the Magirus-Deutz AG catalog did not actually list the models sent to us. Shy and colorful, probably. Power steering, advanced sound insulation, a huge panoramic windshield, and an extra-wide cab. The drivers worked in just their shirts. Lucky guys, but you have to remember, in the summer, there were swarms of mosquitoes and gnats. And in the winter, the extremely low temperatures of the far north and the dangerous icy roads. Real strongmen, not us. Well, what about me? A total of 9,500 such trucks were delivered to our country, and we have to give credit to the German manufacturers. After the thaw in relations between Europe and the Union, things quickly froze over again. But the West German company fulfilled the contract terms completely, and that included not just vehicles and spare parts, but also at the very least training for mechanics.
Downside. Well, aside from the single-plate clutch, I couldn't find any others. For a truck like this, a single-plate clutch is a limitation. Another downside. Trucks like these weren't just handed out to any drivers, only to exemplary socialist workers. So my temperature is over 100. Well, that's fine. That's the oil temperature and the air temperature. After all, we're running air cooling, no water involved. Another drawback, the gearbox has completely unsynchronized gears, but even so, they still shift quite smoothly and easily. Well, not that easily actually, they do shift though. I wanted it to be easy, but it's not easy at all. Well, sorry about that, once again. Sorry.
Magirus trucks made a significant contribution to the construction of the Baikal-Amur mainline, the BAM. Magirus essentially became a symbol of that construction. Today, few Soviet Magirus trucks have survived for objective reasons, but there are still some left, and a few are still working, regardless of their mileage or age.
Well, I've opened yet another doorway for you into the depths of history. Don't be lazy. Take the time to read about the design features. If you read through the driver's memoirs, on one hand they're like intense crime novels or thrillers, or maybe on the contrary they're deeply patriotic literary works. It's really fascinating. And the hunt continues. enchanting and melodic song.